come to speak to, and more.
The honourable member for Coast Bay Central Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, last week, Winston at the Gandern Area Food Bank confirmed that usage is up 44% in just 6 months. He's concerned about volunteer burnout, Mr. Speaker. The CEO of Food Banks Canada now says that due to record-smashing demand, food banks are on the brink. For folks forced to now use food banks, Mr. Speaker, who never had to do it before, this government and this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost. So will he stop his increase in carbon tax by 23%, or better still, axe the tax so that Canadians can afford to put food on the table?
Yeah, axe the tax. The Honourable Minister of Labour.
$1,192 for a family of four in Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. Speaker. $760 for a family of four in New Brunswick. $824 in Nova Scotia. $880 in PEI. $1,120 in Ontario. $1,200 in Manitoba. $1,800 in Alberta. These aren't phony benefits. These aren't chicken feed, as it's been described by the other side. This is cold, hard cash. This goes into the pockets of Canadians. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Canadians cannot wait for a Conservative government to restore all of the rights and freedoms that this government has destroyed. After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister has driven 2 million people to food banks. With record-smashing demand and donations drying up, the CEO of Food Banks Canada says food banks are becoming unsustainable. Knowing Canadians are suffering, this Prime Minister raised the carbon tax by 23% and refused to pass 234 in its original form to make food less expensive for Canadians. He's not worth the cost. Why is this Prime Minister punishing the poor and exterminating the middle class?
Good. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Wow, Mr. Speaker, that member who has advocated to roll back the rights of women just stood in this place and said that Conservatives can't wait to implement those measures. Mr. Speaker, women will remember what Conservatives are saying. They are saying they will take away women's rights, just like in the U.S., and we will not stand for it.
The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, did you ever wonder why former inmates who have had vocational training while incarcerated are just as likely to reoffend as those who have not, despite the fact that Corrections Canada claims to have issued 112,000 vocational certificates in the past 3 years alone? Well, the answer is this. These vocational certificates are meaningless participation awards. In the same period, only 64 inmates in the entire country were able to complete a Red Seal apprenticeship program. Why has Corrections Canada failed to introduce real vocational certification programs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the Harper Conservatives did everything in their power to restrict corrections from being able to offer offenders vocational opportunities to ensure that there isn't recidivism. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives' own former criminal justice expert has come out condemning Conservative policy, saying it was not based in facts. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives, when it comes to criminal justice, do nothing to keep our communities safe, but we have.
The honourable member for Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, the overdose crisis continues to devastate our country, and no region, including the North, has been spared. As a former Chief Medical Officer, I'm also deeply concerned by the level of disinformation currently being promulgated by the Conservatives. The study that I proposed is currently in Health Committee, allowing all parties to travel around the country, learn from experts, and make thoughtful recommendations to the government. Can the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions tell us if she agrees that to address this crisis we need to work together using the full spectrum of tools that we have?
The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member. Just like the member from the Yukon said, we need to trust in science and in healthcare, not slogans written on the back of a napkin. Canada's model recognizes that prevention and treatment are two ends of the spectrum of care, but we also must care for people. People who are struggling in between the spaces while they struggle with substance use. People need to be alive to make it to recovery. Canada's model means supporting cities. It means supporting Indigenous peoples with the Emergency Treatment Fund. It means preventative measures like implementation of the Icelandic model. It means providing law enforcement with the tools they need. It means saving lives.
L'honorable député de Portneuf, Jacques Cartier.
Miss.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf, Jacques Cartier. Mr. Speaker, to listen to this government, you'd think that everything is going great, but actually, people are smothered by the cost of living. They can barely pay the bills after 9 years of this Liberal government. Currently, servicing the debt costs more than $54 billion. That's more than the health transfers to our provinces and territories. And the Bloc Québécois voted for this. The Bloc members say one thing and do the exact opposite. When will this Prime Minister stop wasting money so that Quebecers can regain their pride? The Honourable Government House Leader. I will tell my honourable colleague what Quebecers have regained: dental care, school lunch programs, nearly 35,000 new childcare spots funded by the Canadian government. They have regained a housing program and billions of dollars that have been agreed on with the Legault government in order to build new housing faster. So what Quebecers have regained here is progress, well-being, and real forward movement. The Honourable Member. As I was saying, this government thinks everything is doing great. I would like to invite them to visit some grocery stores. We see grocery stores putting anti-theft chips on T-bone steaks. That's how bad it is. After 9 years of this Liberal government, our debt has doubled, and yet our friends in the Bloc Québécois have voted for $500 billion in additional spending. Yesterday, Tiff Macklem, the Governor of the Bank of Canada, confirmed that this government's expenses is keeping interest rates high. When will this Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc Québécois, stop wasting money on the backs of Quebecers? The Honourable Government House Leader. Well, my colleague maybe didn't see the same thing as I did, but yesterday, the Governor of the Bank of Canada, the same person, by the way, that the Conservatives promised to fire, said that he is considering returning to a decrease in interest rates. And that is all confirmed by credit rating agencies like Moody's that are keeping Canada with its stable AAA credit rating. That's worth its weight in gold. We are responsible and are governing for Quebecers and Canadians. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, who's not worth the cost, his habits of wasting money have not changed. And so interest rates are extremely high, as we heard yesterday, confirmed by the Governor of the Bank of Canada. In my riding, Beauce, people are visiting food banks more, 20% more. It just shows that voting for the Bloc Québécois or the Liberals has a high cost. The Bloc Québécois keeps voting to support this inflationary government. When will this Prime Minister stop wasting money and help Quebecers feed and house themselves? The Honourable Government House Leader. Well, not only are there all the investments that I just enumerated, but also Canada has a AAA credit rating, the best in the G7, in fact, the best possible rating. And Moody's mentioned Canada's predictable, stable economic future, which was supported yesterday by the Governor of the Bank of Canada, who said that he is considering a decrease in interest rates in the near future, and we're very pleased about that.
L'honorable député de Châteauguay-Lacolle.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Democracies throughout the world are being increasingly threatened by state and non-state actors. For example, we've seen the direct aggression affecting Ukraine, as well as cybersecurity problems. And there's another threat that is ever-growing: right-wing and conspiracy theorist extremism. Can the government House Leader tell us about the importance of standing firm against these threats? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, what with the week we've just had, and dare I say even the last half hour, has been very sad for democracy in Canada. This conservative party, is clearly committed to destroying our fundamental rights. And we saw recently that the leader of the Conservative Party is encouraging white nationalists, anarchists, and misogynists. Things are going in a very dark direction, and I'm concerned.
Mr. Speaker, wildland firefighters have tirelessly kept our communities safe against devastating wildfires. But despite this dangerous and life-saving work, wildland firefighters aren't considered firefighters under the National Occupational Classification. And this impacts their retirement and pensions. It's absurd that the Liberal government and the Conservatives before them have done nothing to fix this. So will the Liberals immediately change this so that wildland firefighters can retire with financial security?
The Honourable Minister of Emergency Preparedness.
Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to thank all the wildland firefighters who have done amazing work. We have been working very closely with the provincial counterparts to address this issue, but one thing, make it clear, in fact, actually, we care very deeply for the work that they're doing. That's why we've actually increased the tax credit for the volunteer firefighters as well. So we'll do everything possible to make sure that we support them. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Ontario government is proceeding with construction on the destructive and unnecessary Highway 413, a $10 billion waste of public money to pave through the Greenbelt. This government could have put a stop to it by requiring a thorough environmental assessment in a Restored and Repaired Impact Assessment Act. Instead, they've proposed a change in an omnibus budget bill that could still let projects like Highway 413 off the hook. Will this government strengthen the proposed IAA and reject Highway 413 to prevent paving over 2,400 acres of farmland and green space?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for his question. I would remind him that the Supreme Court of Canada, in an opinion last year, told us that we had to revise the Impact Assessment Act. This is exactly what we do. But through an agreement with the Ontario government, we will make sure that federal laws like Species at Risks Act or the Migratory Birds will be able to apply to Project 413, and these elements will be assessed as part of this project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that's all the time we have for question period today. I think we have a point of order from the Honourable Member for Durham.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, a point of order. Earlier this week, a lot of noise was made about the Leader of the Opposition saying the term wacko. And yet earlier, during question period, the government House Leader used decidedly unparliamentary language toward me in an attempt to defend his colleague from Whitby. I'd like to ask that, through you, that the government House Leader apologize and withdraw his comment.
Shameful language.
I did not hear it because there was lots of noise happening around that time. Maybe what we can do is go back and listen to the Honourable Government House Leader.
I'm happy to withdraw whatever comment the member is referring to, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Speaker, so the government House Leader acknowledged that he did, in fact, use the term, which was captured by Hansard. It is customary that when this kind of language is used in the House, that an apology is offered by the offender. The offender in this case is the government House Leader, and directed it at one of the newest members in the House, which is not only a terrible example, it's completely unacceptable. The honourable gentleman should apologize immediately.
The Honourable Government House Leader, like I said, I did not hear what the offending word was, but I would ask maybe just to retract it one more time and apologize, and then we'll.
Yeah, I've withdrawn whatever they're speaking about, Mr. Speaker.
And apologize.
I'm happy to apologize for whatever they're talking about too, Mr. Speaker.
But But just for edification, we'll go back and have a look to see if there's anything on the tapes. Honourable member for Durham.
Yeah, I'd just like to confirm it was captured by Hansard, and it's very clear what the government House leader said. Decidedly unparliamentary, especially for a government that made a lot of noise about the term wacko earlier this week.
We will have a look at that and come back to the House. Daily routine of business. Affaire courant ordinaire. Tabling of documents. Introduction of government bills. Déclaration de
statements by ministers.
Interparlementaire. Presenting reports from committees. The Honourable Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, Monsieur le Président, j'ai l'honneur de présenter dans les deux langues officielles.
It's my pleasure to table in both official languages the report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, the 39th report entitled Main Estimates 2024-25, Vote 1 under Office of the Auditor General.
Any other reports? Okay, introduction of private members' bills. Première lecture de projet de loi intérêt.
First reading of public Senate bills. Motions.
Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition in which the petitioners are calling on the government to amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act and for Parliament to pass Bill S-281, known as Brian's Bill, which would do just that, such that convicted murderers would no longer be eligible to apply for parole after they served their minimum sentence. Rather, they would only be able to apply at the time of their automatic review, as opposed to the current situation where they can apply each and every year after their minimum sentence. This is in recognition of the significant trauma and harm that it causes to victims' families to be put through repeated parole hearings.
Presenting of petitions, présentation de pétition, the Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, West Kootenay.
It's South Okanagan, but that's okay. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to rise here today to present petition E4673, a very important petition with over 5,000 signatures from across the country. The petitioners point out that Canada and the world face a biodiversity crisis with 1 million species facing extinction globally, that Canadian governments have consistently failed to meet their international commitments under the Convention on Biological Diversity, that Canada demonstrated leadership in the Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal last year, in 2022, and the Impact 5 conference in Vancouver last year, and that the 2022 Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework signed by Canada sets binding international targets, and that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change stated his intention to introduce by early 2024 legislation that enshrines accountability for achieving these goals, and that such legislation should recognize and affirm Indigenous rights and jurisdiction in alignment with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So they ask that the government introduce legislation in early 2024, this year, to conserve nature in Canada by implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework.
Presenting of petitions, présentation de pétition, the Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is an honor to be able to stand in this place today and present a petition on behalf of Canadians who are raising concern for the actions of what is taking place in Pakistan. And specifically, these are Pakistani Canadians that point out that there is increasing political unrest that has led to the arrest of opposition parties and challenges for free and fair elections in that country. Specifically, the signatories of this petition are asking and calling upon the government and the House of Commons to ask the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development to immediately explore the feasibility of imposing sanctions on Pakistani military members responsible for these egregious acts. And they also ask the Government of Canada to use its membership on the IMF to require insurance of new and current loans and the extension of existing loans to the Government of Pakistan to be conditional on Pakistan's holding of true, free, and fair election. And finally, the signatories request that these measures be kept in place until freedom can be brought to Pakistan. It is an honor to stand and table this petition on behalf of those Canadians here in the House today.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Much, Mr. Speaker, and I have two petitions to table today. The first petition is a petition signed by many Canadians that is concerned about Canada's response during COVID-19 to vaccine equity, knowing that future pandemics we have the potential of future pandemics coming forward. These petitioners call on the Government of Canada to support the WTO TRIPS waiver and to work harder to ensure that in future pandemics, vaccine equity is available to all people in the world. My second petition, Mr. Speaker, is calling on the Government of Canada to provide additional support to Ukraine. The war in Ukraine, the illegal war by Putin and the Russian Federation against Ukraine and Ukrainian people, is worrying for all Canadians. Of course, we have an enormous number of Ukrainian diaspora members in this country, and all Canadians want to see the government do everything possible to make sure that Ukrainian children are returned to Ukraine, to make sure that all supports that we can provide for Ukraine at this time are done. So thank you very much for that.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Speaker, first it's an honour to table a petition on behalf of constituents of mine from Tofino and Ucluelet on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Mr. Speaker, they highlight that lifeguards watched over Lovekin Rock in Long Beach National Park, which is in Taloquit territory, in Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. They had a surf guard program for 40 years, Mr. Speaker, until the federal Conservative government cut the program in 2012. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is probably the highest concentration of people at any beach in Canada without a lifeguard. And emergencies are being often attended to by Parks Canada in collaboration with Canadian Coast Guard, West Coast Inland Rescue, BC Emergency Response Group, the RCMP, both fire search and rescue volunteer firefighter departments in Ucluelet and Tofino, and even CFB Comox, Mr. Speaker, and we've had multiple deaths since the closure of this program. They're calling on the government to reinstate the Surf Guard Tower and Surf Guard services and extend the duration of the Surf Guard program to accommodate the growing number of emergencies as well as visitors at Long Beach National Park Reserve. There was a meeting in March. These petitioners are waiting for the results of that meeting, hopefully the reinstation of this program. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, President Petition, the honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An honour to rise to present a petition on behalf of folks that are quite concerned with methane-fired electricity generation, and they have an interest in moving to low-carbon energy sources. They start with the science, as they should. They note that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change notes that we need to be building no new fossil fuel infrastructure and reach net zero electricity generation by 2035. They note that while some people call natural gas a transition fuel, in reality it is a fossil fuel, and it is a methane producer, a very potent natural gas. It's a quite significant petition, so I'll move quickly through it, Mr. Speaker. In Ontario, they note that methane-fired generation is set to account for 25% of the province's electricity generation by the late 2040s, more than triple its current role. They go on to note that this increase in projected methane-fired electricity in Canada, and particularly in Ontario, indicates that the current level of carbon pricing of methane-fired generation does not send a sufficient price signal to incentivize the transition away from fossil fuels to low-carbon energy sources, and that the currently proposed clean electricity regulation process is too slow to address it. In fact, also it contains loopholes, which makes the issue even worse. They go on to call on the Government of Canada to make methane-fired electricity generation subject to the fuel charge component of the Greenhouse Gas Pricing Pollution Act. And if methane-fired generation remains in the output-based pricing system component of the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, make it subject to increased carbon pricing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting of petitions, Présentation de pétition. questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, but prior to that, just to acknowledge your comments after my SO31, I appreciate what you said and will respect that. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, the following questions will be answered today. 2440, 2442, 2443, 2446, 2450, 2451, 2453, and 2455. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, if the government's responses to questions number 2438, 2439, 2441, 2444, 2445, 2447 to 2449, 2452, and 2454 could be made orders for return, these returns would be tabled in an electronic format immediately.
To the pleasure of the House that the aforementioned questions be made orders for return and that they be tabled immediately. Agreed, and so ordered. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all remaining questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
So ordered. Voila. Orders of the day.
Of the day, ordre du jour, government orders, government bills comments, resuming consideration at report stage of Bill C-20, the Public Complaints and Review Commission Act.
I believe when we left it, the Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby had 5 minutes in his speech. The Honourable Member.
Questions and comments.
Oh, sorry. In questions and comments. So
no. Finished. I hadn't.
No. Yeah, because the Honourable Member only had about 4 minutes remaining. So I would say there was 6 minutes remaining in the Honourable Member's speech when it came back. I just want to check here to be sure. 6 minutes. So the Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby has 6 minutes.
Okay, and thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And where we left off was Conservatives saying this morning that they wanted the bill to pass. In fact, they even chastened the Liberals for not passing the bill. Now, Mr. Speaker, just prior to question period, I asked for unanimous consent to actually move beyond this dilatory motion, delay motion, obstruction motion that the Conservatives have put. What they're asking Canadians to do is pay $70,000, which is the cost of 1 hour of parliamentary time. $70,000 for a parliamentary debate around whether the short title of this bill should be deleted. Now, Mr. Speaker, $70,000 is a lot of money where I come from. And for most Canadian families, $70,000 is in many cases what they earn in a year, and Conservatives have burned that money just in the last hour. So what I did, Mr. Speaker, is I asked for unanimous consent to move to third reading, because at this point, report stage, all we are doing is debating the Conservatives' stupid amendment, wacko amendment that simply says, oh gosh, we're going to delete the short title of the bill. There's no substance to it, doesn't improve the bill in any form, doesn't make any difference in terms of the public commission that so many people have been crying out for, that is so badly needed. All it does is delay and cost Canadians $70,000 for each and every hour of this absolutely useless obstructionism, wacko obstructionism from an official opposition that is not a serious party. Now, they had the opportunity to move on that.
Donc, on a ici un appel au règlement de
Rising on a point of order, the Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, this week, our party leader was removed from this place because he said wacko. But my colleague has been speaking for about 10 minutes and has said wacko at least twice. Is this accepted as parliamentary language or not? I'd like to hear a ruling on that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Donc, je vais vous demander un peu de décorum, s'il vous plaît.
A bit of decorum, please. I thank the Honourable Member for his point of order. There is a difference between calling a policy or a decision by that term and calling a person that term. That is how the Speaker interprets the standing orders in this matter. I invite the Honourable Member for Westminster Burnaby to continue his speech. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I very much appreciate your interpretation of the standing orders. The Conservative members could read this in the standing orders. It says that one cannot directly attack a person. The Leader of the Opposition, who is member for Carleton, attacked the Prime Minister, insulted him, and refused to withdraw the comment. Mr. Speaker, the member for Carleton has been here for 20 years. He should have some understanding of how things work in this place. He knows how to act. It's possible to call out ideas, to call out actions, but we cannot call out individuals, and all Conservative MPs should know that.
$1,000 the Conservatives have burned in the last hour. $70,000 of Canadian taxpayers' money. Now, you'll recall, Mr. Speaker, how woefully terrible the Harper regime was in managing money. $116 billion to the banks, the big bank bailout on liquidity supports. $30 billion each and every year. Each and every year, $30 billion given in the infamous Harper tax haven treaties, a sweetheart deal for Canadian billionaires and the most profitable corporations in the country, and the Conservatives just splurge that money because money doesn't mean anything to them. They're terrible financial managers. Conservative financial management is an oxymoron, Mr. Speaker. They are the worst financial managers anyone has ever seen, and the 10 dismal years of the Harper government will remain in infamy. The worst years of financial management in our country's history. Consecutive deficits throughout that period, massive handouts to the banks, massive handouts to the oil and gas CEOs, massive handouts to overseas tax havens. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker.
Oui, on a ici un rappel.
Point of order. The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
The member has called me and my party bad fiscal managers. I assure him I'm a money manager before I came to this House. And yet I don't see any money managers over there. And yet he's suggesting that I and other members of my party don't know how to do this. And I would strongly suggest that we have, and I'll say personally, much better fiscal plans, much better economic plans than I've ever heard come out of his mouth. So I would like him to retract that remark, please.
Je remercie l'honorable.
I thank the Honourable Member for Calgary Centre. That is a point of debate. The Honourable Member can ask a question to that effect to the Member for New Westminster Burnaby, who can now conclude his speech in 1 minute.
Business Excellence Awards. I have no lessons to learn from any Conservatives in the House, and the reality is he can consult the fiscal period returns produced by the Ministry of Finance, not a hotbed of social democracy, but the Federal Ministry of Finance over the last few decades produces the fiscal period returns. And what do they say? Well, they say Conservatives and Liberals are terrible financial managers, and the best governments are NDP governments. And year after year after year, the fiscal period returns, which every MP, Conservative, Liberal, or any other persuasion can consult, will show that NDP governments have the best record at managing money and paying down debt. And, Mr. Speaker, we do that because we're able to run programs like healthcare and education by not frittering away money like the Conservatives are doing today. $70,000, this debate around this frivolous distraction of deleting the short title of this bill rather than getting on to third reading so we can actually get in place the...
Je remercie l'honorable.
I thank the Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby. Unfortunately, his time has run out. Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, and I was rather enjoying a good portion of the member's comments. I want to pick up on one aspect when he talks about the short title, because for those that might be following the debate, there is a valid argument to be made that the Conservatives are being nothing more than playing an obstructive role, that even though they say they want the legislation passed, they go out of their way to prevent the legislation from passing. So when the member makes reference to the short title, Mr. Speaker, this is the short title. The short title is this. This is what the Conservatives are proposing to delete. This act may be cited as the Public Complaints and Review Commission Act. They want that aspect of the legislation deleted, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if he could provide his thoughts in regards to obstruction that the Conservative Party is playing on such important legislation.
The
honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly the point. It's not only that they want to spend hours and hours debating that one sentence and whether or not we remove it when it has absolutely no impact on the legislation or the Public Complaints Commission. It's that they want to spend. They want to waste. I see the finance critic for the Conservatives in the House right now, and they want to waste $70,000 for each and every hour.
On a ici un rappel au règlement de l'honorable député.
Rising on a point of order, the honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
I think that I would just like for you to reflect. I don't think we're allowed to mention who is or isn't inside the chamber.
Oui. Et à cet effet, l'honorable leader.
To that effect, the honourable NDP House Leader is aware of the standing order. He cannot mention the absence or presence of anyone in this place. He can conclude his reply in a few moments.
They've wasted so far on this meaningless debate and delay tactic. And I think Canadians would say, let's get on with the Public Complaints Commission. Why didn't they accept the UC that I moved prior to question period that would actually allow us to move to a third reading debate on this bill?
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the member talked a lot about just really restricting or censoring the ability of members in this House to speak and voice their concerns around legislation. So I'm just wondering from him, does he think all members of this House should have an equal right to speak to any bill at any stage of the debate? And if he doesn't, as the House Leader for the New Democratic Party, how does he censor or restrict his members from speaking in this chamber?
Here.
L'honorable député de New Westminster Burnaby.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I did want to compliment my colleague for his French question a little while ago. I was quite impressed with that. His French is coming along well. The reality is there's no censorship when you're paying $70,000 to debate deleting a one line that has absolutely no impact on the bill. The short title has no impact on the bill itself. This is nothing but a delaying tactic. Now, I point out Conservative hypocrisy. When Conservatives rise in the House and they say, gosh, it's really important this bill passed. Why hasn't this bill passed? And it's their fault that it hasn't passed, that they held up for months of public safety this bill by bringing forward meaningless motions constantly so that we couldn't actually get to the nuts and bolts of the bill. I spoke earlier about the many, many amendments and improvements that the NDP brought as the worker bees of the House of Commons, as the adults in the room. We wanted to improve the legislation so it was better. What did Conservatives want to do? They just wanted to block it, block it, block it. But then if you block legislation, at least step up. Have the guts to say, we've been blocking it for months, and we're going to block it for even more. And Canadians, we don't mind if you're spending $70,000 an hour listening to us debating this meaningless amendment that deletes the short title. At least, if you're going to block legislation, stop good things from happening, at least have the guts to own up to it.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Rosemont, La Petite Patrie, en 30.
The honourable member for Rosemont La Petite Patrie, 30 seconds, please. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an important bill. It touches upon accountability for a number of organizations such as the RCMP and CPSA. So I'd like to hear from my colleague in French. Why are the Conservatives saying they're going to support the bill, and yet they're delaying its adoption? 40 seconds for the answer, please. Thank you. The member for Rosemont La Petite Patrie is one of the best members in this House. He does incredible work, and he's very hard-hitting. And it's hard to know how to answer his question. Why are the Conservatives saying this bill is so important, and yet they're doing everything they can to block it? At a cost of $70,000 for every hour of this useless debate, they're refusing to go to third reading. That would be a useful debate, but they don't want to, and I don't know why.
Débat, l'honorable secrétaire parlementaire du leader du gouvernement à la Chambre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be able to rise and speak in the House. You know, when I think of Bill C-20, the one that we're debating today, I can't help but reflect in terms of what it is that the member from Sturgeon River Parkland had said earlier today. And that was that the Conservative Party was disappointed, in essence, that the legislation has not been passed. And he's challenging the government why it is that we haven't passed the legislation. Mr. Speaker, you know, it's truly amazing the type of hypocrisy that we actually see that flows out of the Conservative Party of Canada. You know, they have this mentality, that far-right mentality, of trying to be able to say to Canadians, everything's broken. And that includes what takes place here on the floor of the House of Commons. They like to spread misinformation, and they like to filibuster and take everything possible in order to prevent things from actually happening within the chamber that's positive towards Canadians. You know, it's truly amazing. And that's what I like about Bill C-20. You know, where I agree with the member opposite when he introduced the bill is when he talked about the fine work that our RCMP and our Border Control officers perform day in and day out. Everyone recognizes the importance of this legislation, Mr. Speaker. We all recognize it. But there's only one political party that's going out of its way from being able to see the legislation actually pass. And that is the Conservative Party, that alt-right group that we witness every day across the way when the House sits, Mr. Speaker. And we see that in the behavior of the leader of the Conservative Party, that they do not want to see a productive House of Commons. And to those that follow this debate or follow CPAC on a regular basis, to recognize that no matter what sort of filibustering and blocks that the Conservative Party puts into place on a daily basis, we will continue to be there to fight for fairness for all Canadians. We saw that in the presentation of a budget that builds upon Canada's middle class, that provides a higher sense of fairness, so those that have more can cover for those individuals. Everyone's paying more of that fairer share. That we don't forget about the millennials and the Generation X, Mr. Speaker. C-20 goes a long way in providing a substantial initiative that is needed to support our RCMP and our Border Control officers. And what are we actually debating? We're debating, and I'll give you the actual quote. Instead of trying to get to the matter at hand in hopes that we can try to pass this legislation, because the opposition knows full well there's a limited amount of time for government legislation. And you would think, Mr. Speaker, that they would take that issue seriously, especially if they say that they support legislation. But instead of allowing the debate to go into third reading, this is what the Conservative Party of Canada has done today. They moved an amendment to a substantial piece of legislation, and this is what the amendment is. You have a long title for legislation, and then you have a short title. Here's what the short title actually says, Mr. Speaker, and I quote from the bill itself. This act may be cited as the Public Complaints and Review Commission Act. How much more simpler can it be? How could that possibly be controversial, Mr. Speaker? There is no controversy surrounding that issue. So then one asks the question, why did the member opposite, why did the Conservative Party decide to bring in this particular amendment? Well, the short answer is because they don't want it to go to third reading, Mr. Speaker. Rather, they want us to debate that aspect in the form of a filibuster. Mr. Speaker, this is obstruction. That's what it is. And that is the type of thing that we witness far too often on the floor of the House of Commons. Today, it's a ridiculous amendment in order to prevent legislation from going into third reading, and then they will cry, oh, we want more debate time, we want this, and we want that. Absolutely illegitimate arguments that they will bring forward to justify the behavior that I believe a vast majority of Canadians would not support. Yes, there are some in society, the far right, the Diagolon group, that will support these types of actions. But I say to the leader of the Conservative Party that the vast majority of Canadians would not support or condone the type of far-right extreme behavior that we are seeing being implemented by the Conservative Party, including bringing in senseless amendments like that we're seeing today, Mr. Speaker, with the sole purpose of preventing the bill from being able to move forward. At the same time, they have the tenacity and persistence of being critical of the government for not bringing forward legislation, for not getting this legislation passed, Mr. Speaker. You know, if you listen to what the member was saying in his speech, he then went on to be critical of the government because we're not supporting Canada, CBSA, the Canada Patrol, Border Control officers, Mr. Speaker. Does the member not even realize that it was the Conservative Prime Minister that cut hundreds of jobs in that area, millions of dollars from that department? And he's criticizing us? We reinstated the funding and added more to it, and he's criticizing us on that issue, Mr. Speaker? Do they not know any shame whatsoever? Do they not realize the hypocrisy that's overflowing from the modern right-wing Conservative Party that we witness day in and day out when the House is sitting? This is a party that is not there to support Canadians, Mr. Speaker. When we talk about supporting, not only does it mean getting behind legislation like what we have today and allowing it to pass, but it also means recognizing the initiatives that are there in the budget that is there to support our border control agents, Mr. Speaker, and our RCMP. You know, by developing the board that the legislation puts into place, the Independent and Enhanced Public Complaints and Review Commission. This is something that is, in fact, needed. Everyone in the chamber recognizes that, but only one party wants to prevent it from becoming the law, that wants to see it enacted. And then they will criticize. Just like the member opposite tried to criticize us for not taking action on the issue of gun smuggling. Seriously? Take a look in terms of the actions that we have taken in comparison to the previous administration under Stephen Harper. When they talk about auto theft, the greatest auto theft that was taking place in Manitoba was in that 2004 to 2008 era. Both national Liberal and national Conservative governments, Mr. Speaker. It's not just the federal government, it's the provincial governments, it's the non-profits such as Manitoba Public Insurance, those all coming together that dealt with the problem. That's why we have the summit. There's a government that has taken action, contrary to what the Conservatives tried to say. Actions speak louder than words, and all we hear is wind coming from the Conservatives, and it doesn't smell good at all, Mr. Speaker. I would look to the Conservative Party and ask them to grow up on the issue.
Questions et commentaires. Je reconnais l'honorable député de Sturgeon River, Parkland.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, these NDP Liberals stand in this House today and they say it's a waste of time to be debating this very important legislation. Well, it's not a waste of time for all the civil society organizations that had very serious concerns about this bill, concerns that were not fully addressed at committee. They have there's the National Police Federation, there's union officials, there's working people who are concerned that if there is an unfounded allegation against them, they're off work for a year and they're not going to get paid. Conservatives moved forward amendments to try to ensure that they would get their back pay if it was found that it was unfounded. These Liberals defeated that. That's why it's so important to have debates on this in the House. But I would draw attention to this House, to the parliamentary secretary himself. He's saying that these are ridiculous motions. Well, on November 26, 2018, he himself moved a notice of motion to delete the short title for Bill C-87. And again, on March 6, 2017, the parliamentary secretary put a motion on notice to delete the short title of Bill C-22. This Liberal parliamentary secretary is being a hypocrite in this House. He has done this on numerous occasions, and he should be ashamed.
Hear, hear. L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Mr. Speaker, you know, there is no hypocrisy if the member would allow me the time to be able to expand on the things that he just finished saying. Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about is substantial legislation in which there is support coming from all sides of this House, and how the Conservatives are using this as a tactic in order to filibuster. You know, and then what makes it even worse, listen to his response to my comments. He's saying, well, it's all the people outside the chamber that don't want us to pass this legislation. They're the ones that are causing us, they're the ones making us do it, Mr. Speaker. Let me tell the member opposite. At the end of the day, the Conservative Party needs to grow up, take responsibility, recognize that they too were given a mandate, and that mandate was to work with government, not just oppose for the sake of opposing and filibuster everything that's there. They have a responsibility. They're not living up to it.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Nipien.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in a civilized society, the security of the community is not just through the implementation of the laws, but by the trust of the public in the law enforcement agencies. The trust the public has got on the law enforcement agencies will provide stability and effectiveness in any society. I would like to ask the honourable member his comments on that particular thing.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
You know, by establishing a public complaints and review commission, it reinforces and strengthens public confidence in the system. And that is what makes the essence of this legislation as powerful as it is, as a potentially effective tool that will assist in keeping that confidence in two institutions, both our RCMP and our Border Control officers, who do phenomenal work, and that is recognized not only here domestically, but internationally. And that's one of the reasons why I believe the legislation has the support that it has from all political parties inside this House, Mr. Speaker. It's unfortunate that one leader, the leader of the Conservative Party, has taken the decision to advocate more so on policy positions of the extreme right, which is causing issues here in the House of Commons.
On a le temps pour une brève question, l'honorable député.
A brief question. The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague. I'd like to hear from him about why his party voted against the NDP amendment asking for a set processing period for complaints having to do with systemic racism. If there isn't a set time frame, then the organization can drag its feet and not provide an answer. Many civil liberties organizations have asked for this. Why did the Liberals refuse?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I'm sure you can appreciate, I wasn't necessarily at the committee, nor did I hear the explanations that would have ultimately been provided. I think that the member would be best advised to sit down with the departmental officials or possibly have that discussion with the minister. What I do appreciate is the fact that, the members of the Bloc, the New Democrats, have recognized the importance of the establishment of the Commission. That is the most important thing. And not only do they recognize it, that they would like to ultimately see it passed, Mr. Speaker. I see that as a positive thing. Unfortunately, based on what we're witnessing today, it would appear as if time allocation might be required in order for this to see the light of day, because the Conservatives are determined to prevent it from passing, even though they say they support it.
Reprise du débat, l'honorable député de Battle River, Crawford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, and it is always an honor to be able to stand and debate the issues that are so important to Canadians. And but, Mr. Speaker, if I could, I'd like to cast some light on some of the rabid disinformation and misinformation that is being propagated, certainly by that parliamentary secretary across the way and the House Leader from the New Democratic Party. In fact, that member will be very, very interested to hear that it's a relatively common practice to bring about amendments at report stage, and in fact it's that member himself that did so in, we have an example from 2016, and I have it in front of me, where he moved a motion that would delete Clause 1, which is the short title, and his explanation of doing so was not that he was trying to delay and stop legislation, but rather that there were important issues that needed to be discussed. And in fact, there's a number of examples where that member, that parliamentary secretary, was quick to move amendments that were in substance not necessarily substantive, but to ensure that certain issues could be discussed about, because it is some of those issues that are so important in the context of the discussions that we do have in this place. And then to remind the NDP in this place, and specifically the House Leader of the NDP, that while they are maybe the worst negotiators in the history of coalition agreements, that they have accomplished virtually nothing while propping up a government that continues to do things that they complain about on a daily basis. I'll put that issue aside. But they have actually moved a number of amendments, and in fact, I have an example here from in 2018, NDP member from Victoria, seconded by a member of the Bloc Québécois, moved a motion that would have deleted a short title as well. So, Mr. Speaker, the indignation shown by other members of this place, I think, speaks to how they are so quick to dismiss the very, very valid concerns that can be brought forward, including, in this case, by members of Canada's law enforcement. And I would suggest that what drives the attitude to which they are bringing the debate into the House today is not one of wanting to pass this bill, because, Mr. Speaker, here's the facts. This bill has twice died on the order paper. And it is that government, it is the government that controls the legislative agenda. Yet this bill has twice died on the order paper, and yet they say somehow it is a priority when we are now in the third year of this Parliament, and yet here it is today. So they may want to not talk about it. They may not put a priority on it. But excuse me, Mr. Speaker, if I, along with my Conservative colleagues, when we have the opportunity to discuss important issues on a bill that we will be supporting, we will take the opportunity to do our job. Because, Mr. Speaker, that is why Canadians sent us here. So it is, I think, indicative of how truly dysfunctional those two parties are when we hear the absolutely absurd rhetoric that is being propagated by senior members of those parties. Now, Mr. Speaker, specifically when it comes to the substance of the bill that we are debating today, there is, many Canadians may not understand the specifics around what we're talking about. But I think that most Canadians would agree, and certainly those that I chat with when it comes to some of the issues that are facing Parliament. But then there are those that face challenges, those that have a complaint. When there are concerns that are brought forward, and specifically when it comes to policing and in particular the RCMP, there has to be a process in place to ensure that integrity, that complaints can be talked about, investigated, evaluated with integrity. Now, it is my understanding that as the study was undertaken at committee, there were a host of of witnesses that talked about things that could be made better in this bill. Now, there's agreement among all parties that changes have to be made. And this is a shining example, despite the absurd rhetoric from other political parties here today, that there is, I think, a desire to see some changes brought forward to ensure that there is integrity within our policing system. But I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, that we need to take seriously some of the suggestions that have been brought forward. Various stakeholders, including Indigenous chiefs and folks from the National Police Federation, have flagged that that there will be resource issues. There are some suggestions that if we do not have a truly independent process, there will be some hesitation amongst whether that is those who come from civilian complaints or those within the RCMP, to make sure that there is that true and needed independence. Because if it is within the command structure, Mr. Speaker, you can see how I'm sure that there would be some hesitation about how, if a complaint was brought forward, that might be treated. And Mr. Speaker, I would, again, it's indicative, I think, that the other two parties in this place are concerned that we're talking about this, yet they say it's a priority. And here we have, I think, an example of that is that it is deep within their ranks. There is this anti-police, anti-law enforcement ideology that is permeating. And it's this defund the police type movement that they may not stand publicly, and a few of them have, and we've heard those things.